Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafidades Andiro, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry. Today we're bringing you an installment from the Micronesian Area Research Center seminar series. We'll be hearing from Dr. Samuel Betances, who spoke on January 8th regarding cross-cultural perspectives on strength-based, trauma-informed care in Guam and Micronesia. Dr. Betances speaks on what he calls ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and ALE, Adverse Labeling Experiences in the development of children. And he gives advice to parents, teachers, and community leaders on how to help all children succeed.
Have a day. Greetings. Saludos. I am happy to be here. Early experiences determine brain structure and thus shape the way we learn, think, and behave for the rest of our lives. We're born with a heart, with our lungs, with our eyes, with our brains, but the brain is the only component that is not developed when you're born. It's waiting to be made smart. And what we put in the brain and what the brain receives determines the way we view the world, we view ourselves, and we think. And so it's in that spirit that I am very happy that the Micronesian Area Research Center, MARC, as we lovingly call it, has invited me to participate in this seminar. I work with my wife and my boss and my partner, Laura Sauter, Dr. Sauter. And what we do as, in our work is that we provide technical assistance and diversity intelligence for organizations that want to be more effective in achieving their mission. Cross-cultural perspectives on strength-based trauma-informed care in Guam and Micronesia is what we will be talking about. And in that context, let me just go ahead and suggest what are going to be some of our learning goals. Your ACE score, keep in mind your ACE score, your Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, and your ALE score, your Adverse Labeling experiences. ALE, that is the way that you are viewed, and if you belong to a group, the way that you are labeled and stigmatized and stereotyped. Those determine the way you view the world. Those determine the way you relate to people around you. And if your ACE score is very high, you will experience trauma. And so it's in that spirit that I want to introduce you to your ACE score system so that you can determine what your ACE score is, and introduce you to the ALE paradigm to determine a little bit about your score there, and hopefully appreciate how trauma-informed care is essential when people have experienced rejection, when people have experienced marginalization, when people have experienced political suppression, when people have experienced abuse, whether it is sexual or whether it is physical or emotional or neglect. We need to explore under what circumstances might we on Guam and Micronesia figure out a way to provide the kind of care that is sensitive, informed, and strength-based in order that people who have experienced some kind of oppression, some kind of a victimization, are able to thrive, to become resiliency, to bounce back. And so those are going to be the learning goals. Sir William Osler said, it is more important to know what sort of a patient has a disease than what sort of a disease a patient has. And let me illustrate. When Mama Tita is the way we lovingly refer to Loling's mom and her family, when she was ill, we took her overseas to the States, in Chicago, where Lo and I were working at the time, and we went to a hospital, Swedish Covenant Hospital. And Debbie, her daughter, flew in from Hawaii. Buddy was there, the nieces, the nephews, everybody was there. Lo was there. We were all there with Mom. She was sick. We could not add days or weeks or years to her life, but we could add life to her years and days. And it's in that context that we were in the hospital when we heard the announcement. Visiting hours will be over in 15 minutes. And we went about our business taking care of Mom. And when the time came for the visiting hours to be over, people left. We stayed. And the staff kind of sort of began to look at us a little bit weird. Visiting hours are over. And Lo says, we are not visiting. We're taking care of Mom. In our culture, 24 hours a day when possible, we are present in that's what our culture requires. And consequently, we're not visitors. We're part of the force that provides trauma-informed care during the crisis. And they didn't know how they didn't know what to do with us. They have this little room with the TV, with sports, and then they have these magazines that doctors tear out their names and then they leave in the office for people to read. And it wasn't particularly hospitable because they were taking care of people that did not come from Guam, that did not come from Micronesia, that did not have those kinds of experiences. So the way we intervene in the lives of our people is through cultural competencies. So it is more important to know what sort of a patient has a disease than what sort of a disease a patient has. It has to do with the food intake, whether you worship in a particular way, whether you can take blood, on and on and on and on. And so one of the challenges that we face when we find that our people are experiencing pain and perhaps oppression is to figure out what is the most culturally competent way that we might respond to their needs by providing trauma-informed care that is strength-based. What is the ACE study? Well, it's a research study that took place, Caixa Permanente and the Center for Disease Control, somewhere in the late 90s. They were taking, people were coming in for their physicals, and they volunteered to respond to a survey. And the survey had to do with adverse childhood experiences. What happened to you as a child? And your score will be determined by 10 factors. On the one hand, if you have experienced abuse, and there were 3 types of abuse: emotional, physical, or sexual. So if you experience any of those, each one is worth 1 point. Then there are household challenges. Did somebody from your family go to prison? Was there a divorce and a tug of war where your parents are pulling you one way or the other? Did you experience domestic violence taking place in your presence? Did you witness somebody being hurt that way? Was somebody drunk or drug dependent in your house? Did you have somebody in your family with some kind of a mental problem? And so in that context, each of those is 1 point. And that is part of your ACE score. And the last piece at the extreme end is neglect. Have you experienced emotional neglect or physical neglect? Now here's what they found out, which was very fascinating. The higher your score, your ACE score, the greater your chances of becoming addicted. The greater your chances of coming to terms with the fact that the world is not a safe place in which to live. The more you then try to take a leave of absence from reality. We take drugs, legal or otherwise, to take a leave of absence from reality. And eventually those drugs get us addicted. But it's not only drugs. You can do gambling, you can do shoplifting, you can do risky sexual behavior because you were not loved, you're looking for love. If you were raped, it is possible that you might think that your body made you attractive to a rapist, so you could begin to eat and balloon out and become obese so that you're not attractive to somebody. Or you might decide to do it the other way around, where you practically starve yourself. Or you can go into a shopping binge. Or you can do any number of things, like in religion, where you become totally fanatical about your belief systems. If you have been injured, if you have been abused, if you have been neglected, if you have grown up in an environment where you have seen these horrible things take place to the people around you, you then escape from that reality by becoming addicted and dependent and becoming a health problem for the society. And that's what the ACE score says. The higher your ACE score, the shorter your life. The higher the ACE score, the bigger the fall into the pit of dependency. And it's in that spirit that we have that. So failure to have a positive experience with people leads victim of trauma to seek negative attachments to addictions or other self-destructive behavior. So what are you attached to? That largely depends on whether you have people that love you or people that abuse you. And if the people abuse you, then you tend to follow this pyramid, where you will find that your adverse childhood experience messes up your brain. It disrupts your neurodevelopment, your social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, adoption of health risks, behavior, disease, disability, and social problems, and early death. If you have a high score, the research indicates that you're likely to die 20 years sooner than those with a low score or a zero score. Often victims have no other option but to remain in the nexus of their trauma. So if you're abused and you can't hold a job, you then come to live in the very home where you have experienced abuse. So in a sense, you're stuck.
We're listening to Dr. Samuel Betances, and we'll be back with more after this break.
The Northern Marianas Humanities Council invites the public to this year's CNMI Junior High Mock Trial on Saturday, April 7th from 8 a.m. to 12 noon at Guma Justicia Courthouse in Susupi. This non-competitive event has students learning about the law and standard courtroom procedures as they argue a fictitious case of a shootout between a farmer and a drug enforcement agent. Participating schools are Dandon Middle School, Francisco Mendiola Sablan Middle School, Hopwood Middle School, Escuela Francisco de Borja, Dr. Rita Enos Junior High School, Tinian Junior High School, Chacha Ocean View Middle School, Saipan International School, Saipan Community School, and Mount Carmel School. All rise Saturday, April 7th at 8 a.m.
Welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour. We're listening today to a presentation made by Dr. Samuel Betances as part of the Micronesian Area Research Center seminar series. His topic is Cross-Cultural Perspectives on Strength-Based Trauma-Informed Care in Guam and Micronesia. He speaks on the impact of ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and what he calls ALE, Adverse Labeling Experiences in the development of children. And he gives advice to parents, teachers, and community leaders on how we can help all children succeed.
So take me, for example. I am really well accomplished. My ACE scores were very high. I have buried my 6 brothers. My father was an alcoholic. My brother went to prison and died of violence. Another one died of AIDS. I was sexually abused as a child. I came home one day and there was nobody home. So just imagine, you're 13 years old, you go to school, you come home, and there's nobody home. I have 9 scars in my body. I grew up on welfare. My mom white, my daddy black, so I suffered the stigma of racism and poverty and colonization. And I found somebody who got into my face and basically said, Sammy, God does not make junk. You need to reject rejection. You have strengths. You are intelligent but unskilled. The problem is that you need to read, and the words that were middle class that your parents couldn't give you, you got to get from books and from the dictionary. And so I found this Japanese American woman who guided me with trauma-informed care and guided me with my strengths. And as a result of that, I started to read, and I stayed away from destructive behaviors. And while I have buried my 6 brothers and could not find a good connection to my people and my relatives in Puerto Rico, I happened to come to Guam and find a family that welcomed me, and found my best friend who's loved me. And together we now have returned to Guam, where I continue to experience a tremendous amount of affirmation, even though in my insides there's still injuries caused by all of that remains inside of you. So here's what happens to us in Micronesia. We have on the one hand the ACE score that everybody has, the abuse, the neglect, the household challenges that we talked about, the 10 points. And then we have the ALE paradigm, ableism, classism, genderism, colonialism, languageism, racism, religionism. And to some degree, you're always on the spotlight of doubt. And we have people in our islands who live on the spotlight of doubt every day. So not only are they experiencing ACE trauma, they're experiencing societal trauma, and they both gang up on us, and we have some serious problems that have to do with health and otherwise. So how is that manifested in our communities? Suicide, the 5th leading cause of death on Guam. And by the way, most of them under age 30. Family violence was the top charge offense in the Guam Superior Court in 15, 16, and 14. It has been documented. Obesity on Guam is well above the world and national average. So based on 2010 stats, Guam has a diabetes prevalence rate of 11, making this condition the 4th leading cause of death on our island. And then in Palau, domestic violence and other issues related. And then in Yap, we also realize that that's a big problem, alcoholism and violence in that area. Where does all of that come from? And what impact does it have? And by the way, this is not the responsibility of the professionals. The professionals are important. The therapists are important. The psychiatrists are important. The caretakers are important. But also the clergy. Also those of us who are educators. And those of us who basically have resources. And it's in that spirit. B.J. Cruz basically said, Senator Cruz, while nothing can excuse family violence, Guam's homes are exposed to a crosswind of economic, social, and cultural pressures. Unless we learn the right emotional and psychological tools necessary to cope, unjustifiable violence can become the symptom of deeper problems. So here we have it. We have the factors that amplify each other: abuse, neglect, and household challenges, and then all of the isms that are around. So healing from physical, emotional, psychological, social, and spiritual crisis is greatly impacted by the interaction between these two factors, these two sources. And we just can't say to people, get over it. It has taken 20, 30, and 40 years for people that experience sexual abuse in our island to finally feel somehow that it is safe to come and to relate to that. And you can see them 30 years later crying because these are unresolved issues. Because in our island, we cannot afford to betray our family members who do this stuff. Everybody's related to everybody. So there's a conspiracy of silence sometimes. But saying just because your ACE score is very high or low and you have privilege, you can just get over it. That happened 20, 30 years ago. Mom, why didn't you stop him? Well, sweetheart, I was young, inexperienced, and I didn't want him to leave me, and I wasn't there. But just get over it. It doesn't work that way. We have to provide trauma-informed care. Understanding gender differences matter. You're likely to be injured if you are female by somebody who says they love you. If you're a male, you're likely to be injured by a stranger. And therefore, the way we relate to this issue becomes super, super important. A non-trauma informed system basically says, what's wrong with you? An informed system says, what happened to you? I was mentoring a former student of mine who was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and eventually came to make amends after he took the 12-step program. And interestingly enough, I did it wrong. I didn't have the competencies that I have today. I used to say to him, Miguel, you have a college degree, you speak 2 languages, you're relatively good looking, you have a car, you have American citizenship, you have a passport. Get over it, get with it. He says, my father would beat my mother every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. When he discovered that she had been unfaithful. And we were all tiny little kids, and we experienced the beatings for years and years and years, and it messed up our minds. The bear came home every night, and instead of me saying, Miguel, what happened to you? I would say, just get disconnected from your booze, you'll be okay. And one day he got disconnected from his booze, came home, and began to drink at the level that he used to drink before he stopped drinking, and he got alcohol poisoning, and he died 2 years ago. So, to some degree, we need to stop blaming the victims. What's wrong with you? Why don't you get over it? Why don't you begin this important process of recovery? Get a hold of yourself. Stop blaming others. Strength-based trauma-informed care is an evidence-based intervention that works. The strength perspective demands different way of looking at individual families and communities. And so in that context, Mary Yamasaki was able to look at me and say, you're intelligent, you got a good work ethic, but you don't have the words that are essential. Give me permission, authorize me to tell you what no one else will tell you. And I authorized her, and as a result of that, I was able to graduate alone. No one from my family came. And then graduate again and again. And in the context, became successful. This does not mean giving a pass to dysfunctional behavior. Rather, it represents a positive, holistic approach. So here, my last moment. Here are some strategies to consider. Change the narrative. Stop somehow telling children that it is okay to be disconnected from their language. Stop telling your daughters that she has to go and she got married and a divorce is not acceptable, and so she has to stay in a place where the bear comes home every night. Stop simply enabling someone who's addicted, but work with that person and through their strengths to reinvent themselves. I found that I could not have a good relationship with my mother or my father. I had an excellent relationship with Lo's mom and dad and with her sibs and family, and I have an excellent relationship with her. So we need to attach people based on their strength. We need to attach them, engage in positive strength-based relationship. Lastly, some of us worship in communities. And there are parking spaces, and there are toilet facilities, and there's climate control, and our children during the summer have no place to go. And while the elite can take their children overseas and they continue to learn and spring forward, the children from poverty do not get an education. If you want to improve the health of our island, make sure that our children are continuing to build their word power, their reading power, their study power, their critical thinking powers. So let's go ahead and give them the opportunity to do so. Volunteer. Get out of your comfort zones. And be willing to step out of your comfort zones and be inconvenienced. Remain hopeful. Healing is possible. As practitioners or community advocates and leaders who may not have high ACE score, develop your cultural competencies. Read resiliency memoirs. If you preach, if you talk, if you teach, read resiliency memoirs about people who bounce back from their adversity. And in that context, you'll have illustrations to help people heal instead of escaping from reality, to transform themselves, because today simply will be the first day of the rest of their lives. And if you don't read, you can't lead. Thank you very much.
We've been listening to excerpts today from a presentation by Dr. Samuel Betances, made in cooperation with the Micronesian Area Research Center. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.